All right, so family get-togethers loom, and along with the festivities, your chance to stand up against prejudice or play into it. Our next guest argues that most gay people face homophobia first from their family. Yet round that family table, what happens? Usually, she says, not much. When gay families fight, some of the same old dynamics play out too. In her new book, Sarah Schulman calls for intervention. What would the anti-bigotry equivalent of a great boycott look like? Well, find out. Sarah Schulman is a playwright and a novelist, and the author most recently of The Ties That Bind, Familial Homophobia and Its Consequences. Very glad to have you here in the studio, Sarah. What a pleasure.
Thank you.
This is kind of a family get-together. We've known each other 100 years.
Literally.
Talk about familial homophobia. You coined a term. I sort of figured it had always existed, but I guess not.
No, strangely, it's the one experience that all gay people share, and it had absolutely no name.
Surprise, surprise.
Right, but that's why it took me 13 years to write the book, because I had to figure it all out from scratch.
What did you decide that it was, and how is it different from other kinds of homophobia?
Well, I think that the family is the first place where gay people and straight people learn about homophobia. It's the first place that gay people experience punishment. It's the first place that straight people learn that they can use homophobia to their advantage.
I was going to say, when I said, around the table not a lot happens, you actually say not a lot of intervention happens, but a lot actually happens when it comes to handing out punishment and reward.
Right. The reason I think that not a lot of intervention happens is because a lot of gay people have felt for many, many years that their family's homophobia was their personal problem. And they would constantly re-enter their family, often where they were alone, and try to fix it, and it would never work. And then they'd go home and talk to their friends who are all having the same problem. Now I think we realize that it's a cultural crisis. It's not something to be solved inside each individual family, but something that we have to address as a society.
But let's, before we get to the society, talk about the family for a minute, and maybe talk about your experience. I mean, you say very powerfully in the book, telling the truth. It used to be the great, ACT UP slogan, silence equals death. Turns out that telling the truth, coming out, being seen to be who you are, gay, lesbian, bisexual, doesn't necessarily solve the problem.
I know, it's shocking, but I think for many years we thought that visibility was going to change everything, because we thought that people were homophobic because they didn't know us, and that if they would know us, they would love us.
Of course.
And then everything would be different. But now what we're seeing is we've just lost 31 out of 31 ballot measures. Is that all across America, people who know gay people, know they have gay people in their families, are still willing to vote against our civil rights. So visibility has not solved the problem.
What happened in your family?
My family is just the same or on the continuum as every other family, and I do give examples from my own experience in the book, but larger than that, I think it's more important to take it out of the confessional individual problem mode and really see familial homophobia as a social responsibility.
But I do think in this era where there is at least the illusion, and even in the culture, the illusion that everybody has a gay person in their family and everything is happy-making, it was, to me, healthy and good to be reminded you're still being denied access to your nephews and nieces. You still have no healthy relationship with your family, and you're still dealing, you and I guess lots of people are still dealing with therapists who say the answer is no relationship. Well, thanks.
Well, that's really interesting, because I, like many gay people, tried to resolve my problems by going to therapy. And I think a lot of gay people rely on therapy as in a substitute for parents and family. And for years, therapists have told me, separate from your family. Go out, create your own family. And I know many people my age have heard the same thing. But I think that ultimately that's really problematic, because then what happens is we don't have a family, and the offending family reconstructs itself and goes on without any kind of consequence. So the much more preferable is the idea that the whole society has to work together so that families cannot get away with isolating gay members.
This is what brings us to your discussion of intervention and the private. And you get there through a conversation about what happens in gay families, and in particular what's happening in kind of lesbian divorce cases. Kind of shocking stuff.
Well, what I've noticed is, and I think this is true with a lot of oppressed people, is that you tend to extend the hand of the state. So that, when you're on the receiving end of a certain kind of cruelty, but then suddenly once you have a chance to be that perpetrator, you just grab the power. And the example I give in the book are these famous lesbian custody cases that are around the country, where a couple has a child together, and then when they split up, the birth mother tries to retain custody, not allow the other partner to share custody, on the basis that it wasn't a real relationship. So they use the lack of rights and the fact that the court will support them in acting unethically to punish the other member because they can. And the larger message I draw from this is that when it comes to queer people, really you can do anything to them that you wish because there's no system of consequences. Nobody will intervene. And that's why I have this vision of how we can change that.
Well, I wanted to get to that. The vision that you put out is a community response, but there's just one problem. The community has its real problems and is also affected by this same dynamic. You talk about how difficult it is organizing among people who are both victims of homophobia and participants in the culture.
Well, I mean, if you look at gay history, and I am the co-director of the ACT UP Oral History Project, so I spent the last 8 years studying why ACT UP and AIDS activism was so effective. And one of the main reasons is because we had a community-based relationship. Today, we're really being pushed into privatized family units.
So just tell us what you mean by that, community-based relationship with each other?
Well, that we, like I can go into any city in the world and meet gay people and have a meal with them and have a place to stay and have many common things to discuss because we're part of a diasporic community that have certain shared experiences like familial homophobia. As we currently, in this very retrograde moment, not just for gay people, but for all people, are being pushed into privatization and privatized family units, we see that those privatized families cannot respond as effectively as a community. So if the AIDS crisis were to strike today, I wonder if we would be as effective as we were in 1984, for example.
If we perhaps had the kind of political party sponsorship of marriage issues, would we see the same level of community organizing around it?
You can already see that the answer is no, because when you look at gay parenting, a lot of people who were very, very productive citizens and really contributed to social transformation, now when they're gay parents, there's no radical movement for childcare, for example. And you'd think that gay and lesbian parents would be in the leadership of that type of movement, but they get sucked into the privatization problem.
You and I were both in the AIDS movement at a time when there were many people like us saying, in fact, we should be calling for health care for everybody. Right. And we're still in that fight. And we just saw it play out around healthcare reform. We're not getting a whole lot of reform, it seems to me. What of the lessons that you've learned around this struggle do you think are applicable to the broader culture? Are there other places where community response would be healthier than the privatized response to a problem?
Well, I think that we're on the cusp of a huge social change. And I'm a teacher, so I work with 20-year-olds, every day. And I am flabbergasted at how rapidly they've changed in the last year. I'm really, really optimistic because I think a lot of the generations after us were bought off by yuppiedom and the yellow brick road towards, private interest and becoming consumers. And now that I have students who can't get jobs after school and can't get summer jobs, they have to think about who they are, how they're going to cobble their life together, and what their values are, and they're becoming a lot more individual in the way that they think. So I'm seeing suddenly a hunger for more recognition of each other, different kinds of social values, and I teach in the city university, so I'm talking about, poor and working class students. And it's a dramatic change, so I'm very optimistic.
But aren't these some of the same people who were fighting for gay marriage and for the kind of individualized solution you were also criticizing?
No, because gay marriage is a top-down agenda. It's not something that came from people looking at their own. I mean, yes, people in relationships wanted relationship recognition, that's true. But people in their 20s, gay marriage is irrelevant. I mean, any ideology that's telling young women to get married is appalling as far as I'm concerned, whether it's gay or straight. But part of this new individuation that's happening is going to be people looking at their immediate experience and deriving their political agendas from what they are actually living, which is the way it goes.
So cusp of progressive change, transformational change. At the same time, you make a very strong case in the book that it's not going to be cost-free for those in power now, which is something we've liked to say. It's not zero-sum. Rights for us doesn't mean no rights for you. Right. It does mean change for you, though, those in power.
Oh, absolutely, because people who have false power have to give it up when there's equality. That's always been the case. When black people don't have to ride in the back of the bus, white people have to stand. When women have equal academic opportunities, men fall short. We've seen this all along, because then people start getting evaluated based on their merit and achievement instead of on their gender or race.
So what would that really mean? How would that play out in your life, for example?
Well, let's say in a family, right? Let's say that there's a lot of privileges for being straight and getting married, and the gay people are marginalized or their lives are treated as lesser than. ideally and appropriately, the straight members of that family should refuse to put up with that. So they should deny, should refuse privileges that they're being offered simply because they're straight until the gay people in the family are treated the same.
So I won't get married until everybody can?
That's one way. Or saying, if so-and-so is not invited to Thanksgiving, well, I'm not going to go to Thanksgiving. And that's a microcosm of a larger social vision. We should all be acting that way with each other. It's a kind of broad accountability and a refuse.
A lot of people will have an opportunity to live out these ideas this holiday season. Any suggestions, recommendations, tips?
Well, ask the gay person in your family what they need and start there.
Finally, you talk about the culture, and your last part of the book beautifully, is almost in a conversation with the culture. Two things. One, you say, it's really hard for the culture to answer the question, why do you discriminate against gay and lesbian people? And we've had that conversation on this show. I'd love you to take a look. It is really hard. Secondly, you say that the shunning that the culture does creates a kind of intimacy, but it's a sort of one-way intimacy. Can you just explain?
Well, the question has always been, why do people hate gay and lesbian people, and why do they want to hurt us? And for many years, we had this, I think, mistaken idea that it was homophobia, fear of gay people. But when you actually review your own life and think about people who've been prejudiced against you, do you see fear on their faces? No. If you look at, throughout history, when people are cruel, there's a certain kind of fun that accompanies it, like those famous photos of white families picnicking underneath the lynched black man's body hanging
or the
in
pictures
Indiana.
From Guantanamo.
Right, or Abu Ghraib.
Abu Ghraib, yeah.
Yeah. So, I suddenly realized that homophobia is not a phobia at all, that it's like a pleasure system, that it's not fear, it's fun. People enjoy it because it makes them feel superior. And it starts early in the family. You can elevate yourself if you're straight and your sibling is gay, just like out in the world. You can think that you are better. And that's where it's coming from. It's something that's bringing people happiness.
And it gives the culture some kind of happiness to say, I'm not answering you, I'm not talking to you, I'm not publishing your books, I'm not listening to what you have to say.
Well, it helps them pretend that they're naturally superior and that their privileges are deserved, instead of facing the fact that it's socially constructed and completely artificial.
So what would be, to answer the question at the very beginning, what would be the anti-bigotry equivalent of a grape boycott? What would...
Well, it means that not expecting gay people to take all the burden of changing the world ourselves. And, historically, people with privilege have always had to participate for oppressed people to rise, right? Men had to vote for women to get the vote. White people have to participate in dismantling racism. And straight people have enormous responsibilities in changing the way gay people are treated. And I know that they can rise to that responsibility.
We love that. We live in hope. Sarah Schulman,
Yes.
Thank you so much. Ties that bind: familial homophobia and its consequences. It's short, sharp, to the point. Check it out. Just out. There's more information at our website, grittv.org.